Delicate Subject, Chapter 15. She did not consider for a moment allowing Garrus or Thane to leave her side. Miranda would lead the second team. Legion would go through the ducts. When Jack rolled her eyes at the cheerleader's promotion, Jane told her, "Jack, you've had to requisition things through Miranda, even though you would prefer if she were a smear on the wall. Did she ever, once, fail to get you anything you needed?" "No, but fuck that. Nobody cares." "I care that someone can be hated and still do a job for greater good. She'll watch your back while you're busy resenting her for stupid reasons. She's tough, and she won't accidentally let you make a lethal mistake out of dislike." Jack snorted and rolled her eyes. Miranda didn't stand straighter because she didn't make any gesture other than a nod. "I have met some extraordinary people in my lifetimes. I have fought at the sides of many of them. Some of them, perhaps wisely, chose not to join us. There may be wisdom in the wider worlds. This is not a job for the wise. This is a job for the brave. Of all the extraordinary people I have had the opportunity to work with, whether or not they embodied something I valued, wisdom, skill, intelligence, or force of will, I would not trade a single one of them for the people in this room. By your choices, by your actions, by your lack of wisdom." There were a few smiles, heads ducked, and a long, drawling laugh from Grunt. "You have shown yourselves to be the best examples of courage. I have never been more confident that a group under my command would overcome what was set before them. That is your influence on me. I'm proud to be counted as one of you. Let's go show them what it means to be a force of will, how we stand for the living, how we defy the presumed inevitable. We are the inevitable." The majority of the fight was fast, greased, mechanical. She was hard, determined, and aimed with the precision of a bullet, unable through her own will to change her trajectory. They'd all had so much practice she barely gave a command. Everybody did what was needed in the moment. There was a moment when Garrus clutched at his side and she imagined a burrowing creature, a bullet track through plate and sinew. And then he stood. He was injured. She knew the scent of Turian blood, but he was hard, determined, and unable through his own will to change his trajectory. Thane stayed on his injured side for the rest of the mission, and with their assurances that they could handle it by the way they met her eyes, she continued. The emptying horror of seeing a living human being dissolve into some sort of acidic liquid had the earmarks of true insanity. Reapers made no sense, claiming to protect organic life, organic interests, and doing so by breaking them down into elemental components, as though that carried some meaning, as though by extracting thulium from Garrus's skin they held his essence. Organic life was of value because it self-organized, it was unique, it fought for its own survival. People were not preserved by immobilizing them and breaking them down. Once again, she dedicated herself with every self-organizing impulse to fight this delusional bid for domination and control. Samara was the deepest hurt, carrying them through swarms with a barrier, barely able to walk, dispelling the charge in a knockback that made a smirk light Jane's face. When the elusive man contacted them through Garrus's Omnitool, she was appalled by his suggestion of studying the tech. Pain radiated out from several foci under her armor, concussion and strain injuries that couldn't be entirely stopped or were caused by the armor itself impacting on her body. falls and shots and jumps and stray seekers finding their marks at least partially had each collected their toll. She told him, "Thank you for your input. You have provided for the mission to get done. I execute the mission. This base will be detonated. There is no use in this technology. It is an abomination of hubris. I can understand how that would appeal to you, but you don't make that call. I do." Garrus cut off transmission and they shared a smirk. It was good to be the commander, if only to keep this bullshit from perpetuating itself through close contact with an egomaniacal racist. She could not have chosen her team better, Thane's and Garrus' sniper rifle sounding with hers to bring down the monstrosity of a human-shaped reaper. She was definitely scared, but shaken with adrenaline, smartened with so many minor wounds that they added up to a few major wounds. She breathed purposefully to calm her aim. It was absolutely necessary to get it down, get it right, get it fast. It wasn't even the Reaper that did the most damage. It was the sliding and careening of the platform itself and the collapse of the station, all three of them running with blood from crush injuries and shattered armor pieces driven into their skin. Garrus was the most injured. Thane was limping and supporting him, with her sprinting behind, turning occasionally to pick off pursuers, covering their backs. Right here, right now, they'd done it. And broken bones, broken skin, wrenched muscles and joints were worth it. Metagel had been distributed through her suit, enough painkiller through her omni-tool to have time slow down, savoring each shot that protected their retreat. She'd done her job. She could die right here and be blissfully happy with the event. But she had people to look after, an example to set, and there was no way she would allow these mindless drones to take her down. With the modular platforms gone after Thane's and Garrus' retreat, she had no choice but to try to fly, determination crowding out her fear. Joker, of all people, was there, covering her, risking his own bones and no doubt doing himself harm. And the sight made her so very proud as she slammed into the side of her ship and held on. Garrus reached down with a bleeding and seemingly broken arm, braced by Thane anchoring him, and she was on, in, and back, the airlock sliding shut, and then they were away. She waved Thane and Garrus down toward the elevator, toward the med bay, and after a brief nod from Thane to assure her he understood and that he would not succumb to shock as Garrus was appearing to, they were on their way to assistance. She spared 2 seconds to watch the blue and green blood trail they left, and then turned back to the CIC, turned back to Joker, turned back to the fate of her ship. The ship that had guarded them all and needed a witness, needed her there to see and help if she could. Her voice, the command from the ship's brain to her heart. Smoke and the sound and screech of fried electronics and wrenched metal surrounded her. Her memory flashed back momentarily to the destruction of the SR-1, but she had never been a fan of negative associative memory, and she shoved it away. It was an artifact of the amygdala, sent, strong, and evocative. Intellectually, she gained understanding and therefore control of the process, as she had so often in her career. She would not let it hijack her mind. There was no place for fear or hesitation or some cumulative breakdown. She knew what to do with her memories when she wasn't asleep. She ordered the association to sit the fuck down and shut the fuck up. Her chest ached with one deep, searing cold breath as though she had sucked in only space. And then she had control of herself again. Intellectual control was one thing, but she knew there'd be a price to pay. She knew the difference between intellectual control and emotional reaction. But for now, there was no emotional call to action that she could not deny, defer, stop. Right now she needed to observe. Joker was back at his station. He and Edie worked together in a complicated, wordless dance that she found the awe to admire as she watched genius at play. They were blurring out of the base, through the debris field, back through the gate. Short, suspended, and sobering minutes passed, while her pain and emotion made themselves known like blood through a fresh linen bandage, spread and stain along the fibers. Once they were through the gate and verified they were not being pursued, she punched the intercom. Normandy crew, we are secure back through the gate. Congratulations to each and every one of you. Because of you, there will be no more humans going through that gate. Nobody of any species will be lost to collectors. We have hull breach and systems failure. We are setting in at Omega for emergency repairs. Emergency protocols take precedence. Secure your stations. If you are injured, report to me and then to the medbay. All ground crew, report to the medbay. Dr. Sharkwas must provide me with status on each and every one of you before you will be released from medical hold. Situation reports began flowing in, and she reassessed and assisted and got the immediate fires out, metaphorically and literally. It wasn't long before they put in at Omega, stasis fields up for temporary repair holding. Everything holding. When the smoke had cleared, Edie told her, "The elusive man is requesting a conference." All right, might as well get it over with. I got a few things to say. Channel open. Jane picked her way to the conference room and had to suppress a laugh at his pouting disapproval. She thought he was trying to make his way to menace, but his helplessness was the key note here. She felt sorry for him. He had gambled, and he had lost. She had gambled, and she had won. She still could use Cerberus as an ally, and didn't want them as an enemy, so she granted him the respect of the face-to-face without delay, or power play. She had all the power she needed. She had the deck under her feet, which was now free and clear, entirely hers. In response to her silent appraisal, he said, "You're making a habit of costing me more than time and money." We have been of use to each other, and I would like to continue that relationship. I can get things done. You can provide information. We don't need to make each other happy, but we can be useful to each other. I appreciate the opportunity for my piracy phase. I plan now to go privateer. I will coordinate with the Alliance, with Palaven, with Thessia, with the Solarian Dalatras, with Tuchanka and the Quarian fleet. I may not have met all of your expectations, but you are smart enough to know there was a high probability of that happening. The expectation that I did meet is still of value to the human race. I can still be of value to the human race, but I will set my mission from this point forward. I would like to keep an open line of communication. I appreciate my life back. I appreciate your investment. I will continue to act in the best interests of disparate groups that I believe I can convince to work together. We can at least stay out of each other's way. Edie has informed me of the controls you had on her and your possible contingency plans. I applaud your ruthlessness to the extent that it gave me the opportunity to do what I just did. Your investment in me is a bet that has paid out today. We're square, and I will take the ship and continue to do my job as I define it. If your job coincides with my job in the future, please consider contacting me. He used her tone, her message, and the time she had given him to compose himself. I do not begrudge you the ship or your life, Shepard. I thank you for the service you have provided to the human race. It is entirely possible that we will face challenges met better together than at odds. He cut off the contact. He was done. She kept telling herself that. It was done. She leaned on the table to catch her breath, to deny once again the wave of nausea and the trembles in her knees, the wrenching pain in her ankle as it slowly swelled until she was convinced Karen would have to cut her boot off. Time to report to the medbay herself. Before she'd let Dr. Shakwas examine her, she checked in on all status reports, who had been cleared and who had not. There had been no major injuries on crew that had remained on the Normandy. The ground crew had been able to manage the majority of their own injuries before Dr. Shakwas had gotten to them, but 3 people remained. Samara had requested a medical coma, and Karen had obliged. She had done neural damage to herself through use of her biotics, and would be able to avoid the pain of recovery that way. Garrus had several shattered plates and a burrowed track under one from a Sika, requiring abdominal surgery and a great deal of patching. He was unconscious, put under by Karen before he'd had an opportunity to disallow it. Thane had deep wounds, internal injuries, and burns. Betty was stable and conscious, having watched Garrus, and now watching her. With a deep breath and release of control, Jane contacted Miranda. "Lawson, you're in charge of disposition of crew and materiel, supervision of repairs. The Normandy is now officially a privateering vessel. I have informed the elusive man. There will be no further communication with Cerberus unless it goes directly through me. Unless you have private business to wrap up. I'll be in the medbay until Dr. Shakwas releases me. Anybody gives you any shit, send them down to me so I can yell at them." "No need, Commander. I can yell for myself. Congratulations, Jane, and a speedy recovery." Jane made it to a bed and mentioned she'd probably need to have the boot cut off before a hissing at the side of her neck and a release of choking tendrils of pain informed her that Karen had made her own assessment. She woke up to 3 very worried faces looking down at her. Garrus looked about to fall over. Thane's skin was waxing, and Karen looked almost angry. She looked at them and raised her eyebrows. "Hi?" Garrus shook his head violently. "She said hi." Karen shook her head. "Is that the only word you know, Commander? What is my name?" Alarmed, Jane checked her faculties, but realized the flaw in that, checking faculties with faculties. "Your name is Karen Shakwas, doctor on the Normandy. I first met you when the SR-1 was under the command of David Anderson." Karen smiled at her. "Good. I have been concerned with brain damage. You lost a great deal of blood. I was concerned about ischemic loss of function. The tests were inconclusive, and I had been unable to wake you until now." "How long is now from then?" Garrus was glaring at her. 5 days. Jane's eyebrows flew higher, and then drew together. "Thank you for being able to wake me at all. Blood loss?" Karen nodded briskly. "There was a compound fracture of your tibia through the skin. Your suit filled up with blood, and with the release of pressure," Garrus emphasized, "blood loss. Commander, you had an inadvisable amount of painkiller in your system, which behaved as an anticoagulant. Blood loss. Thane's eyes were closed, and she believed he was praying. She didn't know what to say other than, "Thank you." Garrus sucked in a deep breath. She said, "Thank you." He turned aside to a tray table. "Karen, can I break this?" Karen gave it a glance. "Yes, but not with your left hand. The right should be fine." Karen set about performing neurological checks and tests, questions, and light shined in her eyes. There was a crash and a crack, and then Garrus saying, "Thank you." Then there was another crash and a few more cracks. "I need to speak to Miranda." Thane's hand closed over hers before she could access her Omni tool. "You do not." Karen shook her head. "The ship is well. The crew is well. Her commander is the only member of the crew that has not been released back to active duty. Miranda will remain in charge." Garrus turned her gaze back to her. "And I can't kill her myself." "After your suit was released, Thane held your leg together. Without his assistance under the circumstances, I doubt I could have saved your leg. Possibly not been able to revive you at all." Jane swallowed hard, but didn't want to say she was sorry and have Garrus say something about her being sorry, and then have him break something else. She said, "On the other hand, collector base gone." It apparently didn't matter what she said. Garrus still broke something. That sounded like glass. She consciously relaxed, sat back, and Thane's hand went from restraining to finger-twined comfort. She was tired, and she felt weak, and as long as the ship was fine. She was too military to override Karen, too concerned about Garrus to argue anymore, and too grateful for Thane's hand to do anything other than squeeze and close her eyes. She chose not to speak. She was relieved of duty. So Commander fell away, and so did Shepard, other than the duty of remaining under Karen's care until she was released. Garrus's hands came to either side of her face, and he touched his crest to her forehead with trembling hands. And she was just Jane. Thane and Garrus took turns keeping her company in the medbay while she was there. Thane brought his holographic Pawnifa set, and no doubt was gauging her mental acuity through her strategy. Compared to him, she should be classified as near brain-dead. He beat her every time in shades of "what the hell was that?" and "slaughter" to "truly embarrassing slaughter. How did I not see that coming?" Pawnifa was not as straightforward a game as chess. There was a central circular board with satellites of 8 more interconnected circles. There were 9 separate types of pieces for each of the 9 arrays. Each fight on each of the satellite sections must be conquered before any movement to another board took place. Outer groups could move laterally to aid other sections of the board, or centrally to aid that fight, or having reached the center, radiate back out in any direction. Each of the different sets of pieces in Pawnifa and the separate sections of the board represented aspects of government and society. The central board was for the struggle of opposing ruling tribes, and movement there was different for the ruling class pieces in their sphere than it would be for other classes. The doyen of the ruling class could move in her sphere only, but a priestess of Arashu could move in any sphere, but most effectively in her own. Resources were weak to spies, spies were weak to military, military was vulnerable to religion, religion was weak to media, And so it went. Each sphere had its strength and its weaknesses, its foil and purpose. So one outer board began as symbolically a media outlet competing with another media outlet until one was eliminated, or if the takeover was skillful enough, left in place as puppet pieces, appearing to represent the opposite faction, but moved by the conquering player. Then the media could become fully aligned with the battle in the central board, or the winner could move their own pieces and puppet pieces to dominate other sections of the board struggling in their own fight. So there were possible moves of straightforward action or puppet action, direct action and subversion, and capture of resources. She was going to get her ass kicked for a good long while. She'd tried to look up the rules and maybe get some strategy tips, but like much of drill culture, there was no record. Several beautiful pawn Aoife sets were displayed on the Citadel at drill cultural centers, but there was no access to the rules or recorded games. She considered her options, and then made moves, and was often gently reminded by Thane that what she was proposing was impossible. He was patient and understanding, and a pleasure to play with, lightly teasing and correcting, but never condescending. Which must have been hard because she never won, often forgot intricacies, and rarely remembered that a bold move with a representative from the priesthood into the media was going to be met with convergent hijacking of that piece. She was most often left with all of her remaining pieces hijacked. Garrus was better at it than she was, but he didn't win either, so there wasn't much in the way of superiority, mostly bonding over being habitually trounced. She was always tired, and prone to drift off easily. Thane seemed able to predict those moments, and would pause the game and pull the curtain, dimming local lights, and easing her into sleep that might be fitful, with his fingers on her skin, and his voice in her ear. Garrus would pick her up, sit in the bed, and put her on his lap, and read to her. Being just Jane, even with the dizziness, was fine. After the drama of waking, everyone progressed to calm and comforting around her. And with so many visits, she came to have faith that all was truly well, and that all she had to do was heal. So she did. Release from the medbay after 3 days was not release back to command. She was still on restricted duty, only a few hours a day allowed, and Karen shared a significant glance between the three of them, with instructions that there was to be no exertion. Garrus barked a laugh, and Thane nodded solemnly, and Jane would have laughed, but she was more than a little disappointed, and then shortly after, relieved. She was not up to exertion. She still had a nasty limp, felt periodically ready to pass out unpredictably, and had a contraption below the knee that was not terribly sexy. Nausea was her constant companion. She was also aware that it wasn't simply because of her. All three of them gravely injured and needed time to heal. Garrus and Thane escorted her to the commander's cabin, where she was solemnly kissed, and where she immediately declared she had some work to do, and they did not look surprised. She checked in with Miranda and spent some time getting briefed on the state of the ship, the state of repairs, and the state of the crew, and everything was in order. For a span of days, nothing terrible had happened. Well, Grunt had another hangover, but she wouldn't have to check in on him. She tried to shuffle through correspondence, and there were 2 items claiming to represent the flock. She read them until she started to feel some dizziness creep into the frustration. One read, "Commander Shepard, congratulations on your victory. We see." Ominous, really. Without any specifics, it could just be a fission guess. It could be intended to make her suspect a mole. It could just be random grandiosity, and she wasn't going to touch it. The other one said, "You will know us by our words." Great. Cryptic. We? Us? How many people were huddled over a console composing this bullshit? She kept them in a save file, but didn't see from either of them a link to reply. Anonymous delivery. There was a long list of more correspondence, but suddenly she didn't want to look at any of it. Not just yet. Not with this headache. Not with her leg throbbing along with her heartbeat. She had no replies anyway, other than, "Thank you for seeing, what the fuck?" or, "Which words are we talking here?" She stared at the console for a little while, contemplating nothing in particular, her only interest being not in pain. Thane, as had been his habit in the last few days, brought her some food, medication, and when she'd finished it, sat her down in the center under covers and stroked her hair. Garrus got in on the other side and she drifted, easing a bit further into feeling home. The ship finally truly hers. She could heal at least a few days before those lists of long correspondence drew her back into new and exciting ways to get herself killed. She dreamed of Pon Aoife, but more specifically, not being able to play, not knowing where to move, looking at the plethora of spaces open and not knowing how to get there. The light on the board faded, and she was standing immobile, with nowhere to go as other pieces converged, and her color faded from red to yellow, the two colors on the Pon Aoife board, and then to a shimmering blue as she transformed to a husk, a reaper ship unfurling above her like fingertips. Once the armature of the ship grasped her to make her move, she woke, calming her heart and stifling a swallow. She didn't move. Both Garrus and Thane were still asleep, and being the only one awake among them was rare. She wondered how much sleep they'd gotten, or how much restful sleep they'd managed in the last few days. Garrus had looked like he was about to fall over when she'd woken up, and right now he looked fallen, exhausted. Karen was excellent at plate repair, but she could tell where it had taken place, and there were new, angry scars burrowing through his hide. She reached out a hand and caught the edges of her fingers on his sternum blade, not intending to wake him. She just enjoyed the connection, so warm he felt like sunshine. She turned her head and looked at Thane, his skin looking better than when she'd first woken. He had no lasting injuries or scars, and she wondered about Drell physiology, or Hanar surgery that allowed that, or biotic abilities. He had no lasting outer scars from any of his injuries, and it seemed to suit his deceptive nature, and also rob him of the character of incidents defining his unmeasured bravery. She'd known Garrus without his scars, but it was such a part of his story now she knew he wouldn't want to go without them. She had imagined Zaid without his scars, and he seemed diminished. Thane was undiminished, whole and unreadable, other than how he looked, how he moved. Water that flowed back in to fill any attempted cut. He often woke the moment she did, but for now she could shift her head slightly, as she might in her sleep, and watch him breathe. Watch his skin subtly shift in the dim light, the blue from the fish tank giving a familiar glow to his green. He had moved away in his sleep, or she had moved away, and she feared waking him by touching him, but wanted to risk it. She moved her hand until it was on his forearm, lightly and slowly, until she could relax the tension in her arm and rest. He slept, and his hum made her smile, the pads of her fingers taken in his venom. Right now, it made her feel comforted, sleepy, at home. Reaching out to the men she loved, She felt for heartbeats. Thane's was easy to find. But for Garrus, she needed to move her hand to his hide between gaps in his plate, to a spot unscarred. It was harder to find than she'd like. With both their heartbeats under her fingertips, she listened for the fading thrum of the drive core, the 3 rhythms disorganized until her mind worked out a pattern that held all of them. With solemn thanks to the ship for caring for them, moments of attention to each breath and heartbeat and thanksgiving, and an apology and gratitude to her leg for still being around, she drifted back into sleep and had no nightmares. When she started to stir from sleep, she was aching, the meds wearing off. Garrus was with her. Thane was gone. Garrus brought her medication and food, something to drink, and she was grateful. She stretched out a bit to clear the sleep, clear the pain, try to focus again. When she seemed to be getting a little more human and started to struggle out of bed with the leg contraption snagging on the covers, it looked like he was going to help her, but he pushed her back down to the bed. He kept a hand on her shoulder, looming over her, and she met his eyes. He looked again like he was ready to fall over, mandible tight, eyes narrowed, and she could swear a twitch of his jawline clenched. "I have a few things to say." She nodded and sat back. He kept his hand on her shoulder, no longer restraining, and sat down on the edge of the bed, trying to make an effort to be less intimidating, she thought, but that wasn't going to work. "You are a very reasonable person, and right now I have no use for that. Just listen to me. Having grown up in a large, loud madness and often being one of the most restrained people there, I find myself in the bizarre position of being the most demonstrably emotional of the 3 of us. First off, let me be reasonable for at least a moment. Thank you for getting us all through the collector base. I feel that gratitude, and I always will, and it will get stronger once I get other crap out of my way. I'll be able to talk about that later, and I'm sure I'll have bar stories with admiration in my eyes and all the stuff you're used to from me, but there are a few more things that are unreasonable, and I don't really give a damn whether or not you want to hear them." He looked at her closely, and she nodded at him, receptive and curious. His hand moved from her shoulder to her face, and he stroked the back of his knuckle along her cheekbone. "You are so beautiful." That seemed more of an aside, and she stopped herself from making a joke about that being unreasonable. "I made you a promise. To always be there or not be there, no fear, no failing, no folly. And I can't keep that promise. I'm sorry. I'm afraid. I have failed. I seem to be made of folly." She wanted to reassure him, but he shook his head suddenly. "Listen, just don't respond. I know my job is to accept your death if it happened with military poise, but I didn't even manage that the first time and went so far out into despair that I couldn't have found my way back. You found me. I have spent the last week terrified. While we were on that mission, I had no idea how injured you were. I didn't drag you down to the medbay with me, and even worse, I know if I'd tried, I would have failed. So I failed. Your face, you weren't even limping, and all that blood was pulled up to your thigh. For how long? You just kept going, and I don't care anymore if you knew how bad it was or if you didn't. You made some choice to inject yourself with medication until you wouldn't know. You made sure I didn't know, that I couldn't protect you. It's that moment right there that makes me afraid, makes me fail, gives me folly. I feel like as part of this deal, I'm supposed to be able to set that moment aside, and honestly, I thought I could because you'd ordered me to. I promised you that, and I can't deliver. I know if I died, you'd blame yourself every single day of your life for that. So don't give me any hypocritical speech here about how you were in charge, so you bear the responsibility. I can't see it that way. I won't see it that way. It's impossible. All my talk about rescuing you and keeping you alive, and I could barely cover my own station. I don't know what comes next. I do need to tell you that you can't count on me to not be afraid, or not fail, or to not lose myself in folly when I see you, when I hear you, when I have the right to touch you. I feel like I've violated what you asked of me. I don't know if you want what I have to give if it comes with this. I thought I could read you or help you, and I didn't. And you don't want me to, and maybe I can't. He hadn't addressed her by any name. Commander, or Shepard, or Jane, or Karim. He shied away from all uses of address, like he hadn't the right to define her or choose his idea of her. He was right, and she was harsh and unyielding in places, and she had expected him to be the same. Between her focus on the mission and Thane's ability to roll with and recover from anything without outward sign, Garrus was here. Garrus, I didn't ask you to make that promise, but you haven't broken it. You kept me alive. I promised you that I would love you, and that I would be available, and that I would be very grateful, and that's what you have from me. If you were exactly like me, I wouldn't need you as much as I do. He closed his eyes, and her hand reached out to his, and his fingers grabbed onto hers and squeezed. You promised to be with me without fear. That doesn't mean no fear of anything ever. It means that the fear won't allow you to change your choices. Do you want to leave? Does being with me cause too much fear? Garrus jerked his eyes to hers. What? No, I'm not afraid of that. I didn't know if you wanted me to leave. No. So that's the folly part? His mood was too turbulent to smile, but his grip loosened on her a little. Garrus, we have some things in common. We're hard on ourselves. I don't say too hard, because in our line of work, not being hard enough, disciplined enough, is often the reason for failure. We didn't fail. You didn't fail. I didn't know my injury was that bad, but right here, I'll be hard enough on myself to say, yes, I made that call. I was willing to die to get it done. I wasn't willing to be overwhelmed by pain. You're the one out of the three of us that tends to actually point out pain, help us heal it, while we're busy bleeding out and saying not to bother, that it's nothing. I need you. I love you. I am available, and I will always be available to you. I don't care if you'd managed to trip on your way out of the Normandy and had to go back with a broken face, Garrus. I love you. Don't doubt it. I don't expect you to be invincible or psychic. Don't doubt that I love you, or think that you have to be the way you were when we first started. We're past that, and people change, and I've never been this much in love. Of all my undesirable qualities, I do know my own mind. You haven't broken a promise to me. I didn't ask you to make it. You broke a promise to yourself. You ran on a broken leg, covering for me. I did. And I'd do it again. And if I died doing it, I'd want you to be proud of me. Of course I'd be proud of you, you stupid woman. It's the dying that's the problem. She shrugged. So we're both resolved we don't want to die. It's just that circumstances define whether or not we'll get that done. I'm glad we cleared that up. This is why I asked you not to talk. It's like riding a thresher maw. No problem getting on if she holds still, but getting off is going to be hard. Come on, Garrus. I can always help you get off. Under all his apology, he was angry, and she knew it. She knew that mechanic well. Love fueled the fear engine with the smoke of anger. Garrus, you seem tense. Dropped his head and shook it. I'm considering a mutiny, so I can keep you chained to the bed here, safe, while I went out and shot things, came home, and told you the head count before making you moan. It's a hell of a fantasy there. That'd be an interesting day. Well, you held me down already. What's stopping you from that final step? Doctor's orders. No exertion. I know for a fact that you do not always follow orders. If I'm chained up, how much exertion is there if all I can do is moan? His eyes were darker as he raised his head. Do all human women only think about sex? She shrugged and started to use that motion to get out of her shirt. I don't know. All this talk about mutiny, chains, and moans, though, you can't blame me. I did say I was in love. I'm also an opportunist. He stilled her hands and pulled her shirt back down. If I'm going to mutiny, stop helping. In fact, just stop talking. Moans only. Or my name. He took her hand. Activate your Omnitool. I'm setting an alarm on your heart monitor. If it goes above... Oh, hell, what are human heart rates? She leaned into him and watched as he did a little research and figured out resting heart rates and exercise heart rates and set a limit of 130 beats per minute, commenting that humans have ridiculously fast little hearts. So he set her Omnitool to track her pulse with an alarm. Her Omnitool started putting out a soft bleating, marking her heart rate. She almost smiled at safe, non-exertional, non-chained, non-mutiny sex with a monitored heart rate. This is how he broke rules. Rebel to the core. He was the most adorable nerd in existence, and she had about 2 seconds to think that before he had her pinned. His hands and legs stretching her out, her heart immediately skipped a beat, and then started beating harder. He was careful with her injured leg, only nudging it with his to put her into position. He held her ankle down with taloned feet, held her hands out wide to the sides, braced on his elbows and knees, and he kissed her. He kissed hard, her breasts pressed against his plates, her wrists twisted in his hands until she had fists, fingers itching to run along plate edges, touch his throat, Her heart started to hammer and climb in rate until the sound grew louder, closer to approaching the alarm. He gentled his kiss, loosened his grip, pulled back subtly until the alarm slowed. Reverie from his mouth on hers lowered her heart rate. Everything good. Everything perfect. The pain was melting. She was lightheaded and strained. He was home. She was safe. Her heart raced into a deep, heavy pound when he said, "Close your eyes. Hold still." The race of her heart at his voice made him chuckle. That sound set off further pounding. He sat up partially, released her wrists, dragged his talons down the skin of her arms, getting goosebumps and a moan. He licked long lines over exposed skin, dragged his fingers over her, trailed talons just over arms and legs and waist, their heart pounding hard until he had to back off, and she was trying to concentrate on breathing to slow her heart rate, relaxing her fists that would curl into tension as his mouth passed over her skin. When he spread his palms over her breasts, her heart rate went insane, and he laughed, idling with his tongue on her throat, hand at the curve of her hip until it settled back down. Still always on the edge of alarm. Reverie made her forget to pace her breathing. She wanted to give everything, wanted to wrap her arms around him, her body unrelentingly tense. She relaxed her shoulders, but was distracted by his talons grazing her skin, carving away fabric, and sliding his fingers and tongue patiently, maddeningly. She lost track. Her shoulders got tense and her fist clenched, the alarm reminding her, and he would back off until she could control her heart rate. She took deep gulps of breath after holding it, and it was no use. He'd stop, and that would make her heart pound harder with frustration. His mouth returned to her throat, and he breathed with her, set a pace, restrained her from arching into him. He bit down hard, and then kissed her through her moans, her trembling, with her out of her mind. He held her wrists back down to remind her, straightened her leg, kissed her until she was melted and flowing, and she found a place where she could breathe and feel, and her heart was slow and steady and joyous. She lost the rhythm again when he slid his talons under her back to hook around her shoulders, slid his cock into her, and her arms and one leg came around him, alarm blaring, and he didn't stop and didn't leave, his mouth on hers. His voice possessive and raw, speaking the name he rarely called her. Jane. Trip hammer tension released from her muscles in full reverie. No more teasing or stopping, his hands pulling her in tighter, kissing her mouth, her throat, and he rolled to the side, protecting her injured leg with his, keeping it cradled, bearing the weight. Alarm blare crested and faded. She listened to the erratic and unpredictable beat until his hand passed over and deactivated the alarm. As promised, she was only moans and his name as he held her, joined and unquestioningly moving forward with the fear and the failure and the folly and the forgiveness.